Hello, everyone. It's my great honor to be here with you all today, really. It really is. My name is Lucy Reading-Ikkanda, and I've worked in science communication for about 15 years. And I've worked in all aspects of science visualization. I've created layouts and infographics and data visualizations. And I've also commissioned and art directed other visual artists to create illustrations, photo shoots, infographics, and data displays, animations, interactives, all of that stuff. And I'm going to tell you all a big secret. I did not get my degree in science. I did not study biology or physics or chemistry. I did not even get my degree in art. I got my degree in American literature. So for the first few years of my career, and a few years beyond that, I'd be sitting in the meetings and I'd be presenting art plans for science magazines for articles on subjects like Hawking radiation, or quantum entanglement, or artificial intelligence, or stem cell biology. And I'd be sitting in those meetings and I'd be feeling like a complete and utter fraud. Because what did I know about any of this stuff? I didn't know the difference between a B cell or a T cell, and I definitely didn't know the difference between a polynomial equation and any other kind of equation. But what I came to realize was the fact that I didn't have any background information, the fact that I didn't understand any of this stuff, was a huge asset. I'd have to do all this legwork. I'd have to work really hard to understand the subject, do all this research and talk to a whole bunch of people. And when I did that, I was able to identify what the hurdles were, what the sticking points were the things that were going to trip somebody up. And once I understood that, I was able to incorporate that information into the art plans so that I could also guide the reader through those things. And as the years go on now, because I've been doing this for a long time, I have learned some things about Hawking radiation. I know what Hawking radiation is now. And I know what some of the cells in the body do. So now I have to work really hard to remember what it feels like just not to know anything. What I have to do is put myself in the reader's shoes, which is, I think, the #1 rule for science communication. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit today about how I do that in my own work, how I put myself in my reader's shoes. But before I get into any of that, I just want to talk a little bit, just for a few minutes, about who is the reader. So when we're working on an article about stem cell biology, we might think that our target audience are biologists. Or we might think that a mathematician is really the only person that's going to be interested in an article that we're putting out on math. But we all know that the disciplines are not separate and distinct like that. They're not isolated. They've got fuzzy edges. So this year's Nobel Prize in Biology was won by the CRISPR technology, which we probably have all heard of. And what it does is harnesses the power of immunology and applies it to oncology. We've got computer scientists out there that are looking at olfaction, which is our sense of smell, to better their machine learning techniques. We've got cellular biologists trying to figure out how cells fit together in the body. And they're looking at geometry to help them figure that out. One of my favorite TED Talks discusses how a breast cancer doctor struck up a serendipitous conversation with a nuclear physicist. How did that happen? They just bumped into each other and started a conversation. And between them, they were able to invent a brand new gamma detector that was able to image the breast in ways never before seen possible. I'm a firm believer in what I call cross-pollination of the disciplines. Who knows what kind of amazing things can happen if we can get a researcher to look outside of their little world of research and learn about research that's happening in a completely different sphere. So when I ask myself, who is the reader? I say, as many people as possible. So I'm going to talk about a few ways that I think about putting myself in the reader's shoes when I create science visuals. And I've come up with these 3 ways here: do not perpetuate confusion, have your readers back, consider how and where the information will be accessed. And I should say this list is definitely not exhaustive. When I first started planning this talk, the list was massive, but I've only got 20 minutes, so we're going to talk about these three, which I think are really important. So the first one, do not perpetuate confusion. Infographics and data viz are very popular right now. Infographics and data viz are buzzwords. If you want your article to be better, add an infographic, right? But not all infographics are created equally. Some infographics are really confusing. It's actually, I think, better to have no infographic at all if it's an unclear infographic, because people tend to think that they're going to be able to understand a diagram. And if they can't understand the diagram, they're going to think that the subject is just way over their head, and they may well abandon the subject altogether. I read a ton of journal articles every day in my work. And there's a trend that you've probably all noticed happening in journal articles, which is to include a visual abstract, which is basically a summary of the article in a visual nutshell. And it's a step in the right direction. Really, it is. But more often than not, these graphics, I can't make heads or tails of them. There's some really good ones out there, but there are a lot that are really confusing. Then I'll be looking at a consumer magazine that is reporting on the paper, and I'll see that same visual embedded in the article. And I'll think to myself, wow, they are just perpetuating the confusion. They might not leave it exactly as it is. They might use some new fonts or change the colours, but essentially it's the same graphic. And as science communicators, we're not here to just make things look pretty. We're here to educate people. So what I wanted the art director to say is, you know what, this graphic is really confusing. We better not include it in our article. Or even better to say, this graphic is really confusing. Let's make a better graphic. And I'm going to show you an example of that right now. This is the money shot of an article. It's the key result of the research of the article. And this article was really super cool. It was asking the question whether the first animals, did they evolve larger eyes where they were still 100% aquatic while they were under the water? Or did they evolve larger eyes after they climbed out of the water and onto the land? Now, to evolve larger eyes, there has to be a big visual payoff, because it's very biologically costly to sustain larger eyes. It takes a lot of oxygen, it takes a lot of energy, it takes a lot of brain power. So if you're going to grow large eyes, you have to be able to see much, much further, otherwise there's just no point. So what's the answer? I couldn't tell by looking at this. And if you spend some time reading the caption, you might be able to, but even the caption was massive that came with this. So instead, we can help the reader by just offering them something simple. We reached out to the researcher to get the actual data, and then we turned it into a good old-fashioned bar chart that everyone knows how to read a bar chart. So the orange bars show how far I can see underwater, and the green bars show how far I can see in the air, so when I'm on the land. And then we added some little icons down the side to show how the eyes are growing in size. And now you don't even have to read the caption. You know that I'm going to see much, much further on the land than I could underwater. So I would say create a new graphic that better serves the reader. So this is my favourite section here, have your readers back. And it's probably my favourite section because I love this photo so much. This photo was taken by Stephen Strogatz, and he's a math professor at Cornell University. And he asked his incoming math students what emotion they felt when they thought about math. And I hope you can read it, but just in case some of you can't, people have put concerned, scared, headache, oh dear God, someone put. I think we can all understand these feelings, not necessarily with math. Some of us might know a lot about math, but there are some subjects out there that we just feel so intimidated about that we just don't even want to go near. We can use science visuals to give readers the confidence to approach those subjects that they find so scary. And I'm going to walk us through a few ways that we can help the reader through our science visuals. Offer an obvious pathway. So we've all built IKEA furniture and we know it comes with step-by-step instructions. Brilliant. If we've got some annoying pop-up happening on our computer, we're going to Google it and try and find step-by-step instructions to try and resolve that. Step-by-step is something that we're all used to. It's what we're comfortable with. We can use step-by-step in our visuals too. So if you come to an infographic and there's no clear entry point, it's very off-putting. It can be really overwhelming. I don't even know where to begin. But we can walk the reader through. These are the things you need to know. And don't worry, we're going to hold your hand. We know it's not your normal information. We know it's scary, but we're going to walk you through it. Don't you worry. We don't have to use numbers. We could also use arrows or some kind of pathway that shows the reader exactly where to look, or we could just stack the information in such a way that they know this is what I'm supposed to access first, and then this, and then this. So when we're working with data visualizations, you can't really use this step-by-step approach, but you can still hold the reader's hand and say, don't worry, we've got you. We're going to help you through this. We can point out the key information. These 4 charts are incredibly important charts. The Large Hadron Collider takes particles and accelerates them at massive speeds and smashes them together. And then the researchers look at the results of this collision and figure what came out. And in 2015, they ran this experiment where they took 2 particles and they smashed them together. And when the researchers looked at what came out of the collision, they found that there was an excess of energy, an excess of what they expected to find in the collision. And they had 2 detectors, and they both said there's an excess of energy that came out of this collision. And what that meant was that there was the potential that there could be a new elementary particle, which is massive news. It's almost like when we all heard when we discovered the Higgs boson. It was like that. People were pretty excited. And then in 2016, they ran the same experiment. They took 2 particles and they smashed them together, and there was no excess of energy. They call it the bump in energy. So then they had to say it was probably an error, and there was no particle after all. What we can do is highlight the exact place that we want the reader to zone in on, so they don't have to struggle through all those data points. We can literally highlight it and label it. So in 2015, we said there's an unexpected excess, and here are the 2 data points we're talking about. And then in 2016, there was no excess. There's no bump. And then, of course, we would wrap all this in explanatory captioning so that everyone's all on the same page and they understand the implications of these bumps or not bumps. So in our work, we get so used to symbols and abbreviations that we almost think of them as like a second language or shorthand that we just know. I say that these are the things we don't know that we know. We have to be really careful to remember that some of us in the room might know what these things are, but a lot of people are not going to know what they are. Now, symbols can be really helpful, and so we can include them, but we have to be sure that we're catching all the readers. We're not leaving anything that someone has to assume. So in case you were curious, this wiggly diagram here just shows 2 particles colliding, an electron and a positron, that results in a light particle, which is called a photon, which is this wiggly line, and then that light particle scatters apart as 2 more particles, a quark and an antiquark. And these, on the other side here, this line with a bar on the end just means inhibition. So this leukemia cell is inhibiting this natural killer cell. We got the message. We don't have to look at a key. We know exactly what we're talking about. The last part of this section is do not overwhelm the art with too much text. Text is really, really important. The labeling and the captioning is so important, and it really is the subject of a whole other talk. But if we have too much text in our infographics, it's going to be off-putting to the reader. It's just going to look like too much. I can't access it. So a little tip that I use quite often, and The Guardian are using it here in their map, is to highlight certain words in the captioning and colour code them. So you don't need to add extra labels. You're not cluttering up the page with extra labels, or you're not cluttering up the page with a key or anything like that. So the blue and the red in the caption relate to the blue and the red on the map. And again, over here on the other side, the blue and the red in the little caption shows that the viral DNA is the viral DNA in the illustration, and the host DNA is the blue line in the illustration. Okay, so finally, consider how aware the information will be accessed. This is stunning, gorgeous. It's why I got into science illustration in the first place. You just want to hang it on your wall. It's the stuff that wins awards. It's just lush. And it really draws the reader in and helps inspire them into the subject. Here's another absolutely gorgeous one. The colours, the composition, it's just fantastic. These people are so incredibly talented. And I wanted to include one from the National Post. In case you guys don't know, the National Post put out these fabulous infographics, and they're all in this bluey tone, and they all have the same style. They're very identifiable, but they're absolutely stunning. But here's the thing, we don't always have the bandwidth or the time to create something so fabulous as this. And to be honest, they don't translate to social media, to Facebook, to Twitter, and to Instagram, which is where millions of people are going to access your content every day. I like to think of these smaller, concise graphics as the subject of an elevator conversation. So you're just chatting with someone in the elevator for a couple minutes, and they say, "What have you read lately?" And you say, "Oh, I've read this cool thing about this research," and you're able to tell them what the research is, you're able to tell them why it's important and why it's cool, and then you get off the elevator. And I also like to think of it like I could spend days laboriously creating a gorgeous map that tells the reader how to get from A to B. And I could just also create a small, simple map that tells the reader how to get to A to B. And sometimes that's all they've got time for. So when we're creating these smaller graphics and we're boiling everything down to the size of a postcard like this, how do we do that? We've got so much information to cram into such a small space. Well, I think that this is my American literature degree coming in here, because I will look for the key characters and look for the main theme, and I will figure out what the context is, and anything that the reader does absolutely not need to know, I'm going to reject it. It's just very concise and very like a nugget of information that I can read really quickly. And then if I'm interested, I can then go and read the article too. So you're thinking I'm probably picking graphics here that are just relatively simple subjects, but because they boil down to this small size. But one of my favorites is this one that I worked on. And it supplemented an enormous in-depth article on what made our moon. And there are many theories out there for what made our moon. And we were able to create this graphic that walked the reader through each of the theories step by step, and we were able to put it all together so they could easily compare what the theories from what made the moon side by side like this. It's not fancy, it's not like those other ones I showed you. The Earth is just a purple circle with some blobs in there, but it packs a punch because it's so complete and it's everything the reader needs to know. And I can even read it on my phone. So if I was going to summarize this section, I would say a compact graphic can pack a punch and reach a wide audience. So just to wrap up, do not perpetuate confusion. We want to create new graphics that better serve the reader. have your readers back, make sure we produce graphics that are non-intimidating to people, and consider how and where the information will be accessed. Decide whether a gorgeous big graphic or a small, concise graphic would be the most effective for your subject. So, thank you.